For more on this situation, I want to bring on economic expert Dan Eberhart, the CEO of Canary, an oilfield services provider. So Dan, when we look about this latest topic, it's about the idea of the Postal Service and accusations that this whole situation is being done in order to really tamper or hinder mail-in voting. That's the accusation that many Democrats are making. We now hear that the Postmaster General will appear before lawmakers in order to answer some of their questions. Is there merit to these allegations, or is this a little bit of a side story?
Well, look, I actually think this is a bit of a sideshow. Trump has creeped up a little bit in the polling, and I think that this is, something Democrats are using to distract us. There's really not a problem with the mail per se. The problem is really the voter rolls and the registration issues and the voter rolls being up to date. And then with the post office, it's really about the pensions and the fact that the Postal Service is shrinking. Dumping more money into it isn't the answer. And even if it was, in this fifth stimulus bill that Pelosi is blocked, there's $10 billion for the Postal Service funding. So I would think that would make her, more want to get the stimulus bill done. So on a host of different issues, I think this is just Pelosi playing political games with something that really shouldn't be weaponized.
And that last point, I think, is an important one. You bring up the idea that in that bill, $10 billion would go to the post office. Yeah. And a lot of people would think that if you do want to increase the chances of having mail-in voting or absentee voting, whatever it may be that Democrats are pushing for November, getting that funding out there as early as possible would probably be a very important thing to do in order to guarantee that you can do that going into November. However, there are other things that Democrats are trying to put into that bill that are currently holding it up as well. So when we talk about the idea of the post office, I just want to kind of hash this out and get my understanding a little bit better. Are there better, more private ways, or private industries, I should say, in order to get mail out, whether it's FedEx or something else other than USPS?
Yeah, the problem with this whole line of arguments is, even if money is what's needed, the Postal Service needs the money to fund the pension obligations. It's not really about the operations. The other point here is that, look, the Postal Service has been shrinking and the market share has been going to the USPS, or has been going to UPS and to FedEx over time, and people are sending less mail. So the Postal Service doesn't really need the same funding it had 10 years ago, which is what Pelosi's trying to do, at all in the least. We need Trump is right. We need a postal service that's run like a business, and the demand has shrunk. So we need to shrink the supply, and we need to get the pension obligations under control. And now it's being kind of weaponized and politicized. And I think that's ridiculous. Look, everybody likes the Postal Service, but it just needs to shrink to the Postal Service we need in 2020 and beyond. We don't need the 1990 Postal Service anymore, and we shouldn't be paying for it. And I think if you ask taxpayers if they want to pay for this, I think they're going to say no.
And I thought it was interesting, too. There were a couple high-profile celebrities, if you will, over the weekend who were criticizing these decisions. I believe Taylor Swift was one of them. And it ends up that she doesn't even use the Postal Service. She uses a private mailer within herself. So it kind of speaks to the idea that maybe there is a better way to go. If that is the immediacy and making sure that your packages are taken care of, you might go a different route. And that's really what a lot of people are talking about when we talk about the idea of mail-in voting, because the USPS says that it may not be able to handle a major influx of absentee ballots this upcoming November. So doesn't that speak to the idea that maybe universal and nationwide mail-in voting might be a little bit problematic in order to implement in the matter of 2.5 months, that being between now and November?
Yeah, the problem with mail-in voting and the problem with these everybody doing an absentee ballot is simply just we're not prepared. The voter rolls are not ready. For instance, in LA County, 112% of eligible voters are registered to vote. We simply haven't put the money into the infrastructure, not the Postal Service, but the voter registration, plumbing, and infrastructure around the country to be able to do this. And so I just think it's going to be ripe with fraud, and it's going to make the election outcome more uncertain. And I think that the Postal Service needs money for the pensions, but the Postal Service needs to be shrunk to operate for the demand that it currently has. It doesn't need the same funding it had 10 years ago. This is like Pelosi trying to save newspapers or something. It just doesn't have any point. You're just prolonging the death of it, or the eventual shrinkage of it. And it's really a shame. Look, everybody loves the lady that brings them the mail.
Right.
And people love the Postal Service, but it's a travesty that this has been weaponized.
Yeah, and I think that, too, there is a conversation to be had about mail-in voting or absentee voting, but I think you bring up the idea that it's the matter of just pushing it in at the very last minute, which is causing some people to pause a little bit. I mean, I'm all for having a debate and having lawmakers come onto Capitol Hill and talk about how we can get the American people voting in greater numbers, because I actually do think that is an issue. I mean, it's something like half of Americans don't even vote in every election. Yeah. So I would like to get American people more involved. And do you think that somewhere down the line, whether it's mail-in voting, absentee voting, or some type type of more remote voting, do you think that is a direction that we're headed down, or do you think that is something that should be stuck to a more brick and mortar type of location?
I think that's the direction we're headed. But again, I think that Pelosi's, I think that we're spending the money in the wrong place. This money ultimately is going for pensions.
Yeah.
And if we do need to spend the money, it's in the fifth stimulus bill. But more importantly, the money should be going into updating the voter rolls and in voter integrity and integrity around the ballot process, not the mail-in process. This is smoke and mirrors and a sideshow to distract from the fact that Trump is kind of rising in the polls and the Kamala Harris pick is flatlined for the Democrats.
No, and I think you're right. I think once this whole situation is cleared up a little bit and once we're past November, we can have some substantive conversations when it comes to this. But same way as it is for the coronavirus relief bill, same way as it is for police reform legislation, the two sides just do not want to get together right now and give one another a win going into the election year. I think it comes at the detriment of the American people, but you know what? I think it's something that maybe after the race we will see some progress.